Shawn Peterson. If you haven't figured out who that is, you've been asleep all morning. Shawn is the executive director of the Association of Gleaning Organizations, also founded his own gleaning organization back in the day. Have you even talked about that? Oh, well, he started a gleaning organization in Salt Lake City called Green Urban Lunchbox. It's pretty amazing, and it's definitely worth picking his brain about all his gleaning. This session reflects the findings of the census. To compile this comprehensive view of the state of gleaning, Shawn and Kathy interviewed over 100 gleaning organizations across the U.S. and Canada and analyzed data from 150 organizations. That is no small task. In this session, Shawn will share the findings of the census as to how gleaning organizations talk about the very important work we do, what we count, how we share information with our volunteers, funders, and the community, and how we can do better to relate to the impact of our work.
Sure.
And ready.
Awesome, guys. You're going to hear a lot from me over this weekend, so none of my sessions are going to be a lot of me standing up here. These are interactive sessions, a chance to talk with each other. We're going to be talking about a couple issues today, and that's what we measure as Gleaners, what impact we're having on the community, and how we tell that story. So this is to kick off this whole tracking. Track one's about storytelling. And there's some really, really great presentations, and then at the end of the day, we're all going to come back in here if we want and talk about what we learned and how we're going to apply that in our work. If you can't tell already, this symposium is built around giving you time to connect with each other, so this presentation fits into that. The end of the day presentation fits in that. I'm sure some of the other presentations, so if you don't want to talk very much, you're probably going to want to go sit outside, because I'm thinking Kathy's doing something similar. So let's go on to the first slide here. So we learned a ton in the Gleaning Census. We just learned a ton from all of you. Talking to you all for an hour and learning about your program was a really insightful piece. It helped us shape the programming that we're going to do moving forward. We're continuing to analyze that data. But actually, will you go? And there's going to be some quotes, some really great quotes on the board throughout this presentation of people sharing their stories and sharing them in ways. You can feel free to read those as you have time. But let's go one slide and then we'll come back. Sorry. So we asked these 4 questions of all of you in our interviews. For most of you, our interviews sometimes got a little off track and you guys took us on tangents and that happened. But one of the 4 questions we explored in the census project is, why are you gleaning? What are the ripple effects of your gleaning program? What are you educating the public about in your program? And what information are you tracking to tell the impact of this? So we felt like these 4 questions were really, really interconnected. But if we go back to my previous slide, what we actually found is there's a huge disconnect in why you guys say you're gleaning, what you're sharing information about with the public, and then what you're telling funders. And you can see these different colored graphs. This is in the census, so when you can explore it more. But so the first one is, what percentage of you told us why you're gleaning? So the big ones, improving health, hunger relief, reducing waste. Those, sort of stood out as the things that generally people say, yeah, that's why we glean. And you probably could have told me that without me spending hundreds of hours talking to you. But what you might not have realized is, like, when I ask you what the ripple effect in your community are, very few of you even mention some of those things. And then when we ask, what education are you offering, or what are you doing to what I'm going to talk about later is like creating these champions. You can see, it goes from like super darkest color to like the lightest color. Very few of you are doing that kind of education, and we found this kind of disconnect happening throughout. Things that you were having huge ripple effects for, very often you weren't like talking to funders about. You weren't using those stories to tell. When we say, what do you use to share your impact? And so often those things didn't come up, these things that you are having tremendous impacts in your communities about. And so we want to explore that too. We're going to explore that over the next couple of years probably, but we're going to explore it a little bit today. So you can take us through a couple slides here.
Furio. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. Iskashita Refugee Network.
My name is Brandis Kirchner. I work at Tikkun Hayir of Milwaukee. That means repair the city in Hebrew.
I'm Sarah, Sarah Armbruster. I'm with Harvest Against Hunger in Seattle.
Hi, my name is Brendan Finch. I work with and direct Spokane Edible Tree Project in Spokane, Washington.
I'm Barbara Eisworth, the Executive Director at Iskashita Refugee Network.
My name is Catherine Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of Concrete Jungle. We are based in Atlanta, but we serve the entire state of Georgia. We have offices.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I am the Cocoa Harvest Program Manager for the Food Basket, Hawaii Islands Food Bank.
Concrete Jungle. Gleaning is the act of harvesting produce from fruit trees and farms that would otherwise go to waste. And I think the thing that's so amazing, I've seen with urban gleaning and now with some of the farm gleaning that we're doing, is that it helps shift people's perspectives, the volunteers, from, just we're walking down the street and it's just a normal street in Atlanta, so there could be food on every single corner in the street because Atlanta has so much abundance growing in the city. And the same is true on farms, You're driving through the country and then you realize, why are all these melons just sitting here in the field, or what's going to happen to this corn? So I think it's amazing to see how it shifts volunteers' perspective. I also think it's amazing to see how it shifts the perspective of the families that we're serving, to be able to access the most delicious, the most freshly picked, beautiful produce.
There is a huge part of my history that is involved with not wasting things, and also with food. I grew up with food on the brain. It was a big part of my family's culture. We talked about it, we cooked together, we ate together. And so for me, gleaning is a way of kind of engaging in community, in the sense that without gleaning, we lose out on a lot of opportunities to spend time with one another, whether that's in the fields, whether that's cooking and eating and being together. I think that food in general has always been a way to bring humanity and people in general together.
Win, 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 win. It's community building, it's outside in the fresh air, it's saving food that would go to waste, it's feeding people, it's feeding our hearts and souls, it's teaching each other and learning from each other and being active in a way that is incredible. It's kind of one of the only ways I'm surviving 2025 so far, is that I get to be connected to a group of people like you all.
I feel like this one is like a no-brainer. Feeding people is like super important. For me, I've always been really fascinated by food and understanding like the puzzle that is the food system, and my goal is to find a way that quality local food can become like accessible to the average person. So for me, it kind of fits right into my vision and my values.
It's not just about the food, it's about the people. It makes connections that I think would otherwise not be made. And I think that building a community around a shared experience where everybody feels good is just, you can't really replicate that.
The whole purpose of the Gleaning program and associated innovative food programming that we have is specifically meant to be welcoming to UN refugees and community members that want to be involved with other languages and other cultures, to welcome new people to Tucson, to the United States of America. And this gives the opportunity for these individuals to give back. It gives them the opportunity to have a home base.
We have for over 15 years been getting donations from farmers. One particular market each week goes to our Veggie Top Shop program that I oversee. We hire seasonal staff and work with volunteers and create about 450 meals a week.
The connections that are made from gleaner to gardener to food distributor, that is so important for building community.
Person, that to be able to interact with people on their best day really keeps me coming back. You see the beauty of humanity through gleaning.
So you all know why you glean. You all tell great stories why you're gleaning. These are a few excerpts that we gathered at the last symposium. But somehow that disconnect's happening when you're thinking about the data you're collecting and the stories you're telling. We ask during the mentorship program, we spend the first part of this program thinking about the why. There's the what we do, there's the how we do it, and then there's the why we do it. And most of us are really, really clear about what we do. And most of us know how we do it because we go out and do it every day, and so we have to know that happens. But oftentimes, while we might know the why, it gets lost. It doesn't sit at the center of the work that we're doing. And I invite the mentees, and I invite all of you to think about how do we bring the why back to the center? Why do we bring that why back to our data collection and our storytelling out to funders and our storytelling out to volunteers and landowners and all the pieces? Because we're constantly sharing about this. So the thing that we are tracking, 96% of you all are tracking pounds gleaned. This is the most common tracked measure. There's a few of you who don't track it for various reasons, mostly for staff capacity or programming capacity. But when we look back on the why we glean, very rarely does it directly tie to this pound gleaned number or the community impacts that we're having. There's some pieces that we'll track in there, but it doesn't have that direct connection that we would maybe hope to the why. Or what we're trying to change in our communities. And then, the other thing we're tracking is we're doing a good job of tracking volunteer numbers in some form. We're tracking numbers of gleans completed each year. We're tracking, number of distribution locations. But the interesting part about especially these two is that very rarely are we using these data points to tell our stories. When we asked you all, what are you using to tell your stories? These came up very rarely. The disconnect was huge in these. And these, as we'll talk about a little bit later, I think, they have this direct tie to some of the huge community impacts that we're having. One of the big things when we asked you all, what's the ripple effects? It was community. You guys are building community. Gleaners are so good at building community. And it's this huge ripple effect that's happening for so many of your programs. And these are data points that most of you are tracking that can show that community building if we use them to show that. But so many of us just aren't using them for that piece. And then when we get down here, there's really, very few of us are collecting stories about how the program is affecting people or tracking meals or tracking environmental impacts, number of donors, all that stuff. That's not getting tracked very well. Let's go on to the next slide. So yeah, we can go back to this chart and see, there's these disconnects that are happening again. Strengthening local food systems has huge community impact, but we're not really oftentimes educating about that or collecting data on how we're collecting or strengthening community food systems, even though we know we are. You guys are talking about this ripple effect, but we're not collecting that kind of data. Let's go on to one more slide. So, like I said, we're going to spend some time talking in small groups. We could probably talk in these tables since there's so many of you in this room. So what we're going to spend the time discussing in this first group is do the mission, impact, and education and the data you're collecting align in your organization? In what ways do they align or don't they align? So this is a chance for us to talk as small groups. We're going to talk for roughly around 10 minutes.
thing we talked about is how volunteers in our organization are part of delivering food both to agencies within emergency food assistance networks and informally to their own community members. And because the volunteers themselves are helping distribute the food, they understand the impacts of the program more. That was a take.
And then
Hi, my name is Daniel from International Community Foundation, and we were talking about the data points that are collected, and we noticed that 36% collect stories on how their program affects people, and so we were trying to see how these stories. I mean, I was talking about, I received a grant yesterday, and generally, but basically, we generally I answer this to the board, and so I just see the names, the title, and like their affiliations with other for business or whatever we do. And so the lady I received, or yesterday I received one that had the face of the board, and you just see like this organization is from Guatemala. And so looking and putting a face to the people that where this funding is going to is much different and like moving. And so just like how can we use that for the advantage of cleaning? So and we came up with like, oh well, capturing that in a video. But then I was like, okay, well sometimes when I put it in video, I'm kind of like forced, and it's not a genuine kind of story that I'm telling. Sometimes I feel like forced to say something positive or something. And I'm on the spot. So we were trying to figure out like what is a genuine approach to capture these stories and share to move donors and people to become a part of the movement. I don't know. Anybody else want to get? Was I supposed to say something else?
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm able to bunch of people from Washington. I'm not. I'm representing Los Angeles. But yeah, we were talking a lot about how a lot of times when we get volunteer engagement, a lot of times it's through flyers. And folks were saying that on these flyers, a lot of times it's like, look how many pounds we rescue, or look what you can do. But we don't represent the why on the actual flyers. So of course it's like maybe folks can look around and just be like, okay, like the numbers might not mean anything to me, so why would I get involved in this? But actually applying the why could be extremely useful. And we also talked about, since we are from different states, why AGO and why spaces like this can be so imperative, because like we represent not just different like states, but like completely green zones. Like we were talking about how like in Los Angeles, I walk down the street and I see oranges on the ground pretty much every single block. And then they were like, you haven't seen an apple in a minute, huh? And then you have it. So really just thinking about like what we glean, how we glean, seasonality, stuff like that, and how like actually sharing between us ourselves can be really impactful, because that also is inspiring us to continue to work that we're doing. So.
Before you pass, can I just add something there? I think one of the things, we are buried in this work. Like, we like to live and breathe. If you glean, it like can be all consuming. And so connecting those dots are easy for us. It just happens in our head. Like, oh, this many pounds of food, that means X amount of people get to eat, and they're all eating orange juice for breakfast, and blah, 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 and it's great. But if you're not buried in that work, which is most of the people that we're working with or want to work with, then we really need to connect those dots. And I think we really sometimes just, we're like 90% there, and then we just leave that last percent, and like, I don't even know what 90,000 pounds of apples looks like.
Yeah, 2 years ago when we were at the HO Symposium in Seattle, there was a whole talk on making applesauce, and I was like, I've done that since I was a child, so it was just really cool to think about like what you can do with so much different things as well. And you do these 4? Okay.
So we were talking about how one of the strategies that how do we how do we distribute our food broadly or in a condensed way to have a larger impact? That was one of the things that we were talking about. And for our organization, we have a waiting list and continue to be like, well, we could distribute more broadly, but that means that we're going to be taking food away from existing partners. And so that's one thing that we were trying to think about, how we have that larger impact and piece. And one of the other components was the bringing it full circle, and we incorporate the farms in that process and having them be ambassadors for our work and helping them understand that impact. They can consider our Thank You Note project. So that's one way that, and they told us, or we heard vicariously through other avenues, that the first thing that they mentioned is them really feeling that tangible impact of the food that they donated, and they know where it went, and that's a really key piece that we find is very impactful, and we know that they're sharing that.
I mean, that's such a great example of connecting those dots again, right? Like for the farmers.
I think just going back to the point of the actual data point of how many partners are we serving, this really helps us out. I mean, that used to be a thing for us. How many partners are we serving? Oh, 20 and 40 and 50 and 60 and 70 and 80, but that can really dilute again the impact of the work. So you have to question these data points, I think, and make sure you're really going after the right numbers. I'm just going to add, we didn't talk about this. Pounds is always a big thing, but number of pounds over quality of pounds is really critical. What is that? How do we measure quality? How do we incorporate that into our storytelling? We've talked about it a lot over the years. We're finding now with brochures, we're seeing a lot of inedible stuff coming out of brochures and going to feeding programs. That's not quality. So, we just have to make sure the pounds are never taking precedence of the quality of the delivery here.
Yeah, I hate pounds, I'll be honest with you. I hate it as our cleaning metric. I hate that it's the only thing that we can compare everyone across the board with. Because I feel like it's a really inaccurate representation, but it's sort of along the same lines. It's like when we measure these things, we start to chase them, right? We start to chase new distribution partners. Do we need more distribution partners, or what? Can we better serve the ones we're already serving? And so, I think that's why it becomes so dangerous when we pick these few data points that we're gathering that don't directly tie to our why. If our why is quality, nutritious, great food, the pounds doesn't measure that, And it's like, like the guy talked the other day, a pound of canned tomatoes versus a can of tomatoes. That's a way different weight. And what's the real nutritional quality of both of those? And all of those pieces is not reflected in that measurement.
And I feel like this is really where we're losing out, sorry, I'm just going to do it, I don't care. This is really where we're losing out when we look at national food banking as a whole, where the pounds chase is so high, all the money is going with it, it's not floating down to us as it should be. We're the ones doing the work, we're the ones with the vehicles, the fuel, the volunteers. Every day we're out there. We will never be able to say we rescued 800 million pounds the way that, a large food bank might be able to do. And yet we're absorbing the cost every day. So I do think we have to change the dialogue. I think it has to be about quality. I think it has to be about community and impact. And it's incumbent, I think, on us to figure out how we do it. So we can start, seeing the funds coming our way. We have to talk to our legislators. We have to change the dynamic to one of community and solidarity.
Yeah, one of the big things that we saw in the census, we're not sure exactly how to measure this, but you guys are spending, and I'm going to talk about this tomorrow morning, so much time on distribution. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you all are reaching people who are just not reached through the standard charity food system. But that's a story that we are doing a horrible job of telling. And we do have to find a way to tell that story better, because you guys are distributed in senior centers and jails and all these just really, really unique places that don't have fresh produce at all. And that's such a big part of the impact and such a big part of the cost of running these gleaning programs. You know, you guys are spending, you know, some of you are spending 100 hours a week on distribution. That is so much work. I think we figured for every 500 pounds you guys glean, that it takes about an hour to distribute it. So there's a big piece in there that's just getting missed. We are out of time, I know. And we're just getting started. So the great part of this is this conversation is going to continue in the last session of today. So we're going to pick up right here where we left off in the last part of the day. So it's going to be a lot of conversations with each other. So if you want to explore this question that Alex raised here, it's like, so what do? We know there's a problem. How do we shift that narrative? What's the story we're telling, and how do we use that story to build champions? Then I encourage you to join the roundtable at the end of today's symposium. But